The Kuria are one of the three Bantu-speaking peoples in Western Kenya. They are a community of diverse origins and clans, which some researchers refer to as sub-tribes because the differences among them are relatively minor. The Kuria homeland stretches from Migori district in Kenya to Musoma district in Tanzania. The Kuria are divided into several clans which live both in Kenya and in Tanzania. In Kenya, there are 4 clans found, while in Tanzania, there are 13. According to legend, a prophet named Limo told the clan that God wanted them to leave their current area. So they picked up and left, crossing over to the uplands of the Serengeti to a place called the Mara River. They eventually met 2 tribes called the Wapopo and the Wakenye. The Wapopo were a matriarchy led by a woman, while the Wakenye were led by the Mutemi, who was a leader chosen by the people. The migrating Kuria spoke with the Mutemi, who offered them a place to settle and build. Eventually, the population of the 3 clans grew until they occupied the border of Kenya and Tanzania near 2 Maasai strongholds called Kevorati and Gatende. The Kuria chased away the Maasai living in the region and stole their cows, forcing them to relocate to a place known as Wamusome. According to some researchers, the name Kuria was applied to the entire community of sub-tribes by early colonial chiefs in order to distinguish them from other Luo groups along the southern shores of Lake Victoria who were known as Abasuba. Researchers point out that the name only became generally accepted as a collective ethnic name in the 1940s and 1950s, at a time when tribes in Kenya were seeking political recognition from the colonial authorities. The differing views on how the group got its name explains why it has not gained wide acceptance within the community, as many people still largely identify themselves by their subgroup names. Some within the Kuria community believe their ancestors migrated from the region known today as Sudan in 2 groups. One group came through Western Kenya, and the other traveled through Uganda and crossed over to Tanzania by boat. There are others within the community who believe their ancestors migrated from Egypt as 3 clans called Wakira, Wakenya, and Wameria. The clans used the Nile River to make it down to East Africa, where they settled near Lake Victoria. Later on, they migrated southwards to a mountain in Tanzania. Upon reaching the mountain, the clans parted ways, with the Wakenya and Wakira migrating further south, while the Wameria crossed the mountain and continued to Magongo in Tanzania. The Maasai strategized on how to attack the Kuria by using darkness as a weapon. They formed 3 squads of warriors, positioning them to attack from 3 different locations. The 3-tiered attack was meant to ensure that the Kuria people were completely wiped out. In order to force the Kuria people from the safety of their village, the Maasai raided their homes and burnt them to the ground. Because the homes were surrounded by a fence designed to keep intruders at bay, the Kuria had no other option but to leave the confines of their village and jump over the fence, where Maasai warriors were waiting to kill them. It's not clear how many Kuria people died, but in the end, those who were not killed were chased away to a place called Sirari, while the Maasai took all their wealth and their land. Shortly after moving to Sirari, the Kuria community was hit hard by the chickenpox disease, resulting in many deaths. The village was also hit by diarrhea, which killed countless of other people who were unable to get treatment. Those who survived the onslaught of both diseases were left shaken and distraught, and many questioned where the tribe should head next. A prophet named Manku told the surviving members of the village that they needed to return to the Maasai leaders and beg for their forgiveness. He encouraged them to ask for space in the region where they could live, while promising their former neighbors that they would never show aggression again. The village agreed to his recommendation and assigned 3 men to accompany Manku, while 2 others accompanied another village leader. The Maasai eventually accepted their apology and decided to help their former neighbors. Before colonialism, the Kuria practiced both polytheism and monotheism depending on the clan. The polytheistic clans worshipped gods pertaining to particular areas in their lives. They had a god of harvest, a god for birth, and so on. In traditional times, the prayer leader was a prophet called the Omunavi. He led the worships of gods who lived in certain rivers. Another prophet, Gira, would pray in the rivers and await a visit from God, who would appear in his home and raise dust as a sign that he was going to communicate with the prophet. Gira would then speak to God, and then the next day would inform the clan of God's instructions. In the monotheistic Bukira clan, they worshipped one god named Iresa. Iresa would provide prophets with special herbs to treat any ailments within the clan. The Kuria believe that everyone has a gift which God has given to him or her. There is a proverb that says a prophet in his hometown is not recognized. However, a prophet is recognized after what he has prophesied has come to be. Christianity not only changed the beliefs of the colonized communities, but it also changed how they dressed, how they spoke, what they ate, and how they viewed their own history and traditions. The Europeans seduced the clans with gifts such as clothes and blankets at a time when all they had were cowhides to stay warm. Eventually, the colonizers realized that it would be more efficient to convert the leaders and have them influence the rest of the clan than to go and individually try to win each member of the community with gifts. Once the villagers saw their leader wearing clothes and acting European, they began desiring and coveting his way of dressing, while discarding their own styles of dress, which had been staples in their community for many generations. Soon, the villagers and their leaders found themselves mimicking the very people who had robbed them of their identity. Within the Kuria community, every clan had its own council of elders known as the Inchama, who controlled the clan as political and religious leaders. In traditional times, members were selected based on the magical powers they claimed to possess, but over time, the selection process became a way for the community to pick out incorruptible men of high character. The Inchama had tremendous power and influence in the community and acted as the judge and jury in many cases regarding crime or wrongdoing. They decided when circumcision would take place and how it would be performed. They made decisions regarding when and where to plant crops, and they were also responsible for coordinating the rainmaker and the seer, along with initiating special rituals and functions. In the Bakira clan, a great warrior named Chachawandera was celebrated and immortalized as a great hero for fighting to defend his people. He fought neighboring clans, enabling the Kuria to steal their cows and take their land by force. Another man that the Kuria considered a hero was named Chachamatavu. According to legend, he never lost a battle and was best known for fending off the Masai and killing off an entire clan known as the Wamoncha that had settled on Kuria land. Simon Chacha, who was named after Chachamatavu, is also considered a Kuria hero for his role in ending the conflict between neighboring communities in Kenya and Uganda. Due to their habit of getting into conflicts with neighboring clans, the Kuria made sure to coordinate the security of their community carefully and meticulously. Security was organized by age sets, with the older men coaching and training the younger ones. Any man aged 15 years old or above was armed with bows, poisoned arrows, clubs, and machetes in case of any conflict. When the Kuria first settled in a new place, they would build wall fences known as ruas. They constructed the rua around a mountain to prevent easy attacks from neighboring enemies. A rua built from stone was called abogwe, and it stood about 10 feet tall, ensuring that nobody could climb over it from the other side. The role of women in securing the village was to raise an alarm at any sign of suspicion and to wish the men good luck and make sure that the children were safe. The Kuria created deadly arrows which were infused with poison from venomous snakes and poisonous plants called omosongo. In order to conjure up magic, the Kuria used specific trees harvested by the young men in the village under the supervision of their fathers. They took these trees to specific locations and burned them, and from the smoke they would be able to tell whether they were assured victory in the upcoming battles, which helped them prepare accordingly. They also grew and harvested herbs meant to help the clan fight its enemies, herbs for amassing wealth, and herbs for preventing illnesses. Traditionally, doctors in the Kuria community knew how and when to conduct surgery. The knowledge they had regarding medicine and procedures was passed down to them from the medicine men before them. For instance, if a person came to a traditional doctor complaining of a stomachache, the doctor would have them ingest herbs that would induce vomiting. Vomiting usually made the issue go away, but if that didn't work, the doctor would offer the patient herbs that were mixed into soup that induced diarrhea. Herbs were used extensively by the Kuria for a number of different reasons. Kuria doctors also believed that 80% of medical conditions could be treated locally using steam treatment. Steam treatment involves subjecting a very ill patient to an extremely sterile and clean environment while exposing them to steam produced by boiling a pot mixed with medicinal herbs. The steam would cause the patient to sweat out the sickness and eventually cure them so that they were once again healthy and rejuvenated. Various combinations of herbs were used to treat many diseases, including yellow fever, typhoid, high blood pressure, and even swollen feet. When women suffered cramps due to getting their periods, they were given medicinal herbs that were taken by sandwiching in between portions of ugali. There was also medicinal herbs given to couples who were having trouble getting pregnant.
It's important how they chose a leader is behavior, especially truthfulness, integrity. First of all, even to be in that council of elders, the most qualifying attribute was an elder who had integrity and said any bribery or anything that came into play would mess up the whole inchama. They would mess up the whole council of elders. Just a lie or bribery. And that's what's happening today, that elders are not as truthful as they were before. Otherwise, they would not be endorsing the kind of leaders that we are having today. I thought that was very powerful.
Generational sets were vital in identifying an individual within the Kuria society. Back in traditional times, generational sets used to play a big role in the Kuria culture, especially in marriage. Generational sets also had a role to play in circumcision, as members of the community went through the initiation ceremony with people from the same age set. One generation circle is considered to last 25 years, while a complete generation cycle is 100 years. By knowing your generational set, you can easily calculate the age of your elders, and the system allows you to pinpoint when a major event took place in history. Circumcision is a rite of passage marking the transition from childhood to adulthood, as the status of the circumcised individual evolves within the family structure in terms of roles, responsibility, control, and power. Circumcision was done every 2 years, usually when school was out. The children underwent the procedure in early December so that by January, they'll be healed enough to resume school. The night before the ceremony, there's a lot of dancing and singing among the villagers in order to embolden the initiates and make them feel brave enough to withstand the ordeal. Before getting circumcised, the initiates are taken to a river to pray and bless the year of their initiation. They wash themselves in the river while fully dressed, and they also taught the customs and traditions of the circumcision process by the prophet and council elders. During the circumcision for boys, the foreskin and inner skin are both surgically removed, resulting in 2 incisions on the skin. The procedure is quick and simple, as the circumciser removes both parts within 2 or 3 minutes. Boys are required to stand still, look ahead, and not shake until the operation is over. After the cut, the boy, who is now a man, is to continue standing until somebody pulls him down. Congratulatory praise is then heaped upon the initiate for being able to withstand the ordeal like a man. But if the boy winces even a little during the process, the other men in attendance would all say that he cried and shame him by calling him a woman. Girls getting circumcised are made to sit down. They are not expected to withstand the ordeal without flinching or crying, so the older women in the community hold them down. In traditional times, the process for girls was excruciatingly painful, as the circumcisers used to cut the whole clitoris and part of the lips. But in modern procedures, they only cut the clitoris in order to let blood spill out. After an initiate has been circumcised, a woman from the village comes with maize flour and applies it to the area that has been cut. Medicine is also applied to the wound along with medicinal herbs, which are administered orally. The herbs are dried up and ground into powder under the instruction of the prophet. The medicine used for the boys is very different from the medicine used to help the girls heal, because their wounds are vastly different. For example, the herbs that were ground into powder for boys were placed into water and turned into a liquid paste for girls. However, the medicine that's applied orally is the same across both genders and used to prevent them from losing too much blood. Traditionally, during a courtship, a boy and girl shared little to no communication. Despite limited interaction, the boy still had to woo the girl, and this was done during a dance called ritungu, where boys would get to play and interact with the girls. When a boy identified a girl in the village that he wanted to marry, an elder would advise him on which family to speak to in order to ask for her hand in marriage. Elders were extremely influential in helping young men choose their brides. In some instances where the future groom and wife agreed to marry each other, the woman was abducted by the family of the groom and she went into hiding with her future husband. This scenario only took place when the young couple wanted to make sure that nothing would come in between them getting married. An abduction of the wife would force her father's hand, as he would have to approach the father of the groom and demand dowry. This sort of practice was not encouraged. The father of the bride stipulates the number of cows he wants for his daughter during the initial visit by the father of the groom. The number of cows requested by the family of the wife to be is dependent on the financial health of the village. After a couple gets married, a ceremony is held to celebrate the woman's commitment to purity. Women in the village take a hard stone, mainly used for cooking, and dance around it 7 times to symbolize that the woman has never been with a man before. This ceremony is meant to reveal if the woman is truly clean, and if it turns out that she is, it's seen as an omen that her marriage will also be clean. During the first night that a married woman sleeps with her husband, the bed sheets, which are made from the white fur of a goat or sheep, have to be checked by the wife's mother-in-law the following morning. If there's blood on the sheet, then the new wife is considered to be pure for remaining a virgin until her wedding night. When a woman gave birth, there were older women in the village who specialized in helping deliver the baby. There was no training for becoming a midwife, rather, it was a birthright they acquired with time. No surgery or operations were performed, rather, they used herbs to induce the labor. The first ritual performed after a baby was born involved disposing the umbilical cord. Regardless of where the birth took place, the umbilical cord had to be disposed of at the father's home. As part of the ceremony, the women would make a cow out of mud before splitting into 2 groups. One group consisted of women from the father's side, while the other was made up of women from the mother's side. The 2 sides would engage in a contest where they used fighting words to describe the man and woman tying the knot. After a child was born, a ceremony was held a few days later where the baby would be shaved clean by the grandmother. A baby girl was shaved after 4 days, while a baby boy was shaved 5 days after being born. The naming of a newborn is often the combination of names from either the father's side or the mother's side. According to tradition, the first, second, and third child are named from the father's side. After that, the subsequent children can receive names from their mother's side. If a family's first child is a boy, his name will either be Chacha, Marwar, or Muita. Girls choose between Boke, Robi, and Gati. That's it. If you're a firstborn child, you'll wind up with one of those 6 names, which means that they are extremely prevalent in Kuria society. Once a child had a mouthful of teeth, a ritual known as Okwi Hogosa would be performed by a specialist in the village. They would make a gap on both the upper and lower sets of teeth. The lower gap, which was bigger, would be created by pulling out the tooth with a tool made specifically for that purpose. To create the gap in the upper set, another tool would be used to knock the tooth out. After a few years, the child went through another ritual led by a member of the community who specialized in piercing ears. The specialist used a special knife to make the initial piercing, then a small stick would be placed inside the hole. After a little while, a bigger stick would replace the small one, and this process of replacing the stick with a bigger one would continue until the ear was completely pulled down. A newborn was fed a steady diet of breast milk and light porridge called boreta until the child was able to feed on ugali. The recommended time a woman was supposed to breastfeed a child was about 3 years. When a woman had just given birth, she would first be given fermented milk. The milk was put in an elongated gourd which was shaken thoroughly. If a mother was weak, a goat would be slaughtered and should be given soup to help her regain her strength. She would also be given goat intestines, which were roasted and placed into a large bowl to be eaten without ugali. In general, the Kuria's main diet consisted of sorghum, millet, sweet potatoes, and cassava. Kuria used a black powder to ensure that milk was drinkable after more than a couple of days. They also preserved the meat by smoking it using fire and drying it in the sun. Ugali was preserved in a traditional hot pot that allowed it to stay warm for up to 2 days. To be considered a great man in Kuria culture, a man had to be a good fighter and warrior. He had to be wealthy, meaning he owned many cows. He had to have many daughters-in-law, meaning he was blessed with many sons. And he had to have many wives. A man who had amassed such wealth was known as Isugo by the rest of the community, which was the highest title a common villager could receive. Once a man's family paid dowry to his wife's family, the woman was now thought of as his property. In Kuria culture, polygamy was practiced so a man could own several women as part of his investment portfolio. In modern times, women have been gaining more rights and respect within the clan, but the remnants of psychological abuse left by generations of control still remain. Even women looked at themselves as pieces of property owned by their husbands, incapable of ever escaping a life that afforded them little freedoms and muted any type of voice they had in their households. A man valued the worth of a woman in terms of how many children she could give him. A woman who was unable to have children had no value in the community. The husband would return her back to her family, and he would get back the dowry his family paid for her. Even though barren women were unable to keep a husband, make certain decisions, or mix freely with other villagers, they were allowed to marry other women. Once the barren woman found a wife, she'd identify a close relative who was poor and unable to marry his own wife. This person was referred to as a matwari. The matwari's job was to get the barren woman's wife pregnant without anyone finding out the identity of the father. Similarly, a woman who only gave birth to daughters was considered worthless to the community. Oftentimes, her husband would leave her for another woman, and so Kuria culture allowed a woman in her position to marry another woman. The marriage between a man and a woman from two different tribes was considered taboo, as was marrying your age mate. The Kuria people believed that someone who is in your age set looks to you and disregards you, likening the practice to marrying a child. It was also taboo for a girl not to get circumcised. A girl who didn't get circumcised was seen as an outcast, and she wasn't able to get married, ensuring that her parents would never receive a dowry. In the past, marrying a Lua was never an issue, but today, many in the Kuria community consider marrying an uncircumcised person a bad omen for their family. Killing is also prohibited in the Kuria community unless the killing is justified and has a purpose. For instance, during a raid on your village or home, then killing in self-defense is justified. Unjustified killing was considered a curse. Thieves are punished severely for their crimes by having their home and property destroyed. A thief is also cursed and stoned by members of his or her age group. A mother-in-law was not supposed to eat chicken at the son-in-law's home. Women were also forbidden to eat eggs and certain parts of meat, like the castrates and gizzards. Men were discouraged from sleeping with another man's wife. Doing so led to a great fine and public shaming from members of the village. The wife who cheated would also be disciplined for seducing a dishonorable man. Villagers described such women as lacking respect for her role in ruining the life of a man and a family. If you were found guilty of committing a crime, people were warned never to be seen with you, and you were barred from visiting any home. Criminals were excluded from others and not allowed to participate in any community activities. It was taboo to bury someone with clothes on, so the men who dug the graves to bury the dead did so naked. Once the body was buried, they poured water into the grave, then dressed up and left. When a man passed away, all of his wealth was inherited by his male children. A man's land, cows, weapons, and tools were passed down to his sons. If the family had no sons, then another younger male within the clan would be chosen as the heir on one condition. He had to marry a daughter of the family he was inheriting the wealth from. Such men were called Nibantuku. When a husband died, the wives were inherited by his male relatives. The clan appointed an administrator to calculate the amount of wealth the husband had attained and to protect the late husband's wealth and make sure the widow was duly compensated. When the male children were old enough, he would hand over the family wealth to them. To build houses, the Kuria used large pieces of wood as the foundation and surrounded it with small veto branches held together by mud and katana ropes made of sisal, which were harvested and dried to ensure durability. Children didn't sleep in their mother's house. Rather, they were housed a safe distance away to ensure privacy for their parents. When a boy turned 10, he would be built a bigger house, but only if he was strong and mature enough to cut the trees that would be used to build it. The Kuria constructed boats called aboto, which could transport about 6 people at a time. The boats and their oars were curved to ensure buoyancy on the water. They also developed engines that they placed inside really large boats that could carry 20 passengers at once. The Kuria developed a system to mark time and dates, which was greatly influenced by the Gregorian calendar brought over by European colonialists. The Kuria invented 2 types of hoes, one for digging and another for plowing. They also created a slasher tool for cutting leaves, grass, and herbs, in addition to an axe that made it possible for them to cut down trees. Their manufacturing skills with metal allowed them to develop bolts for closing doors, and they often mixed soil into the metal to make it stronger. Stone was also used to make knives and pangas. To store their food following a harvest, the Kuria developed an effective storage container called a granary, made out of branches from a special tree called vito. When a boy was old enough to walk, run, and jump, he accompanied his father to the field to feed the cattle. The Kuria people stand on the principle that knowledge is wisdom. In the past, the transfer of knowledge between elders and the youth was done at night after the day's work was completed. During the day was when the cattle was herded, firewood was collected, and household chores were done. But come evening, the men and boys would gather around a fire and exchange stories. The fireside lessons often were centered on developing good morals in the youth. During the day, technical lessons on how to make weapons or do metalwork were more likely to be taught. Meanwhile, the girls would be in the kitchen with their mothers learning how to cook, while listening to stories about how women in Kuria carried themselves as mothers, wives, and daughters. Respect is an integral part of Kuria life, so much so that a man is allowed to discipline children who are disrespectful, even if he's not related to them by blood. In the Kuria culture, a girl is considered disrespectful if she speaks to a boy or man that she doesn't know. When a girl is sent to the shop, she is expected to walk straight to the shop without stopping to make conversation with someone of the opposite sex. Boys are considered disrespectful if they are found playing aimlessly, instead of staying busy looking after the cattle or doing some work that is of benefit to the family and the community. A man who is drunk and disorderly is considered disrespectful. Women who gossip and talk about others are seen as lacking respect, and a woman who can't cook breakfast in time for her family or who talks back to her husband in public is also considered disrespectful, as is anyone who is seen as lazy regardless of age.